Good morning and welcome to this webinar on basic steps to importing into the USA. I am Jenny Alton from the New York Small Business Development Center Central Office. This webinar is hosted by the International Trade Department of the New York Small Business Development Center. The NYSBDC is a network of 20 campus-based centers and many more outreach offices located across New York State, along with a central office based in Albany. The NYSBDC is a U.S. Small Business Administration resource partner. Our free advising, education, research, and advocacy services are made possible by funding from the SBA, New York State, and our host campuses. In a few moments, you will hear from our own Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore, who is the Director of International Trade here at the NYSBDC. As our presenter, we have Tim Byrnes, President of Jet Worldwide, who will be supported by Linda Bonventre, President of Woltmann and Bonventre Inc. So you know, we are recording today. We will share the link to the recording in a follow-up email. Attendees are muted and will not be on camera. Your chats will only be visible to me and our presenters. If you have questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to type them in the Q&A box as they come up. You can open Zoom's Q&A box from the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will address questions at the end of the presentation to make sure that Tim has all of the time he needs to get through his materials today. And with that, I will turn the time over to Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore.
Thank you, Jenny, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar. As Jenny mentioned, I am Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore, Director of International Trade of the New York Small Business Development Center. The New York SBDC is a partnership of the U.S. Small Business Administration, SUNY, the City University of New York, New York State, higher education institutions, and the private sector. The SBDC provides one-to-one business advisement, training, and research in support of entrepreneurship and economic development for the state of New York. The International Trade Initiative is a special program within the New York SBDC network, which is housed and part of the SUNY network of 20 regional centers and 72 outreach and satellite offices. 98% of the population of the state of New York is within 30 minutes of an SBDC service location. The New York SBDC International Trade Initiative supports SBDC clients statewide with expertise and experience on international trade and trade compliance. We also provide SBDC staff with professional development, increasing trade advising capabilities statewide. All of our services are free, customized, and 100% confidential. We help small and medium-sized companies become globally competitive by providing export development and import operations assistance through one-to-one trade consulting, market research, innovative training, and links to additional export resources provided by our partners, which are Global New York, the U.S. Commercial Service of the Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, Exim Bank, and other public and private organizations like Food Expo Northeast and Jet Worldwide, which is participating in today's webinar. The New York SBDC can help your business become a successful competitor in foreign markets by helping you plan and implement your export strategy. Our international business consultants are available to assist retailers, manufacturers, high technology, and even service companies with export planning and other areas, such as export readiness review, export business plans, targeting international markets, selecting sales and distribution channels, legal considerations and licensing, logistic procedures and documentation, market research and trade statistics, and international financing options. It is easier than ever to get into the global marketplace. Many companies believe that the U.S. domestic market is big enough to meet the revenue goals, but the fact is that 90% of the world's buying power resides outside the USA. Forward-thinking small and medium-sized businesses can tap into this buying power and grow their revenues through exporting. Each year, U.S. companies export well over $2 trillion of goods and services. exporting works for companies of all sizes. 97% of exporters are small and medium-sized enterprises, and 67, of exporters have fewer than 20 employees. If you are successfully operating a business in the United States, you owe to yourself to consider exporting. Many small businesses have products and services with international market appeal, but are not certain on how to proceed. The New York SBDC is here to help. We invite you to contact one of our 20 centers and schedule a knockout session with a New York SBDC certified global business professional and realize your exporting potential today. And here is my contact information, and you can also contact me directly if you have any exporting or importing question. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our main speaker of today's webinar, Timothy Byrnes. Timothy is the president of Corporation Jet Worldwide, a Canadian-based cross-border transportation and logistics group. Timothy served as president of GeoPost Americas, a division of the La Poste Group. He's also served on the boards of several industry groups, as vice president and treasurer of the Express Logistics Association and president of the New York Air Carrier Clearance Facility, or NYACC. His personal consulting extends to global carriers and regional transportation groups. He has a decade of experience in cross-border trade and is a licensed U.S. custom broker. Please, Tim, go ahead with your presentation.
Oh, we can't hear you, Tim.
Okay, good. We're all good?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me stop my video so you don't have to look at me and look at the slides. Okay. Before getting started in the presentation, hold on a sec. First of all, our disclaimer. The information provided in this presentation is intended for general information purposes only. I encourage independent research directly with the regulators and to seek professional advice as necessary. And secondly, a word about Linda Bonventre, who's joining us today. She's simply amongst the most knowledgeable people in the area of customs processes and regulations, and that's no exaggeration. Her brokerage firm, Woltmann and Bonventre, assists in a full array of clearance issues. This is a screenshot from her website. As you can see, it's extensive. They're an independent brokerage, so you can use them no matter how or with who you ship. And Linda's going to take notes in this presentation and be available for questions and answers following this presentation. Now onto the presentation. This presentation provides a framework or sort of checklist, if you will, for cross-border basics, with a focus on importing to the United States. For each subject, I'll provide some first principle insights and links to additional resources. Although the focus is on importing to the US, export and import are not opposite, but rather complementary steps to successful cross-border processes. The fundamentals of importing relate in principle to exporting. I will touch on this point several times during the presentation. If you import or wish to import, you should start thinking in terms of being an importer of record. In fact, if you ever received a package or shipment from overseas, you've already been an importer of record. The term broadly refers to the person or entity that owns the goods at the time of import. This comes with the responsibility of being informed, what customs refers to as informed compliance. Although not a legal requirement, most importers choose to use or partner with a customs broker. The choice can be by authorization per shipment. If you order something from overseas, it comes in via a freight forwarder. Their broker will call you and saying, hey, I have a shipment. Would you like me to clear it for you? You can say yes, give them a power of attorney, and they'll clear it on your behalf. If you plan to import regularly, it's probably best to have a professional broker to help you manage all your imports, but it's up to you. Either way, keep in mind that it's the importers themselves that bore the ultimate responsibility for compliance. Back to the term informed compliance. Let's talk about the commercial invoice. If there's one major takeaway from today's presentation, it's the importance of a detailed and accurate commercial invoice. It's so simple to me, it's often overlooked, and why I chose to put it first in the presentation. The information on the commercial invoice, along with the bill of lading or weigh bill, is a basis for all cross-border transactions, whether importing or exporting. The basics, as you can imagine, are really quite simple, and we've all received invoices that include details of who sold it to you. In this case, maybe the shipper, you as the receiver, what did you buy, the description of the goods, the quantity, how many did you buy, and what's the cost. All that needs to be included. What's often missing is a lack of detail and context describing the goods. Use of such broad terms as car parts, samples, or machinery, and clothing are just too broad. It needs to be more specific. And for nitty-gritty, wonky industrial part, the broader context is necessary for how it will be used is necessary. Basically, that is, if you want to ask, well, what do I need to do in import? I think the first advice that I would give is, let me see the commercial invoice. What are you importing? And let's see if I can make entry based on that. Linda has asked to include the idea, because she deals with this on a daily basis, the manufacturer's name and address is necessary for any wearing apparel entries. If the country of origin is China, the full name and address of the manufacturer, including the postal code, is necessary for entry. And I would emphasize postal code because for some reason, China often does not use postal codes, but it's necessary for customs import and for a lot of other reasons. Even if you export to China, a lot of shippers demand the postal code. So those are two things that need to be taken into account. During the presentation, I'll often refer back to this. That should be on the commercial invoice. That should be included on the commercial invoice, or as it's on the commercial invoice. So just keep that in mind. The most important thing as you start is pay attention to the invoice for customs or commercial invoice. Okay, now let's talk about HS codes and tariff classifications. HS code, harmonized system, tariff classification, all the same thing. The description of the goods on the commercial invoice forms the basis of the HS code, or the best practice is to have the US code included on the invoice. And I'm going to just back up a little bit and try to demystify the HS code process. The harmonized code is a globally recognized way to classify virtually every item imaginable. It's among the most essential concepts for both exporting and importing. The system can be compared to a sort of encyclopedia with chapters, headings, subheadings, and footnotes. And there are rules on how to translate your product description to a corresponding HS code. This is known as the General Rules of Origin, or GRI. The most fundamental of the rules is determining the essential nature of your goods. For example, a thin film LCD display module falls under heading 8524, flat panel display modules. Again, capturing the essence of what is being imported. An air purifier from China falls under heading 8421, centrifuge, including filtering and purifying machinery. Again, all pretty self-explanatory. These examples are from Customs Advanced Ruling website. They publish all their advanced rulings, so I took it right from there. But many times, capturing the essence and the essential nature in the classification can be elusive. Sometimes you have 3 or 4. This could be this, it could be that. It can go from very obvious to incredibly complex. Take this example. And this is an example from an advanced customs ruling in 2022. And again, it's available online. The product is a metal brace for suspended ceilings. Notice the difficulty in determining the HS code based on the product description. Well, this is from the company's website. The product description was likely unclear as well. And we see this all the time in invoices. Like it's some obscure description. You think, what is this? It's a sort of the nitty-gritty, wonky industrial part that I spoke of earlier. Customs determined the heading to be 8302. And I'll just read the first part. Base metal mountings, fittings, similar articles suitable for furniture, doors, staircases, windows, blinds, coachwork, ... It can be very, very confusing. Note that the unit measured is per weight or kilogram. Again, going back to the invoice, the best practice is to include the same unit of measure used in the tariff classification in the commercial invoice. In this case, if you buy this product and it's coming in, you would ask your seller saying, can you include the weight of this because I'm going to need that for my customs entry. The first 6 digits generally harmonize globally. In the previous example of the LCD module, the global HS code, i.e. the first 6 digits, are 8424.11. The US code is the same digits plus 4, 90.00. While this is general theory, I would advise do not over-rely on foreign HS codes when searching for the US equivalent. So how do you find the HS code? Well, there's a few recommendations. One is review online resources, and there's plenty of them. We've posted something on our YouTube channel for how to classify, and become familiar with the fundamentals. Also, ask the seller if they're exporting. If you're exporting, confirm with the buyer what would they like you to use. The seller, in this case, in the previous example with the metal brace, that was a company from New Zealand actually that requested this. So they requested if you were to buy those braces saying, hey, do you have the HS code? And this, they would happily tell you, yes, don't worry. We have an advanced ruling from customs. This is the HS code. You can also consult, if you have one, you consult with your customs broker or attorney. You can ask for an advanced ruling from US Customs. And for exports, you can consider international resources, which are similar to the US resources. You may also be tempted to use ChatGPT or AI to find an HS code. The information that we have so far, and I've tried it myself several times, it's not working yet. So you can try the AI stuff, but I wouldn't depend on it. And keep in mind that the HS code and the US codes, particularly, they change regularly. They're updated. You can see here the 2024 releases. We have 3 already this year. 2023, there were how many editions? 10, 11, 12. 12 editions. So was it 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 11, 12. So they change regularly. And so just to keep in mind that it is a dynamic document, especially now that it's online. They can change it whenever, and they do change it often. Looping back to exports, similar discussions are had in different countries, and every country publishes, I would say most every country publishes their tariffs online, with also both the tariff schedules and HS code lookup tools. Okay, now we're on to value. In the majority of cases, the correct value to declare at export and import is the transaction value. The transaction value is simply the price paid or payable for the goods. In other words, the value on your commercial invoice. Many international customs consider the value for duty to include not just the cost of goods, but also the cost of shipping and insurance, known as a CIF value, cost, insurance, freight. Although US Customs does not consider shipping and insurance in the value for duty, I recommend having these 3 costs included again on your commercial invoice. To the US, it helps ensure you're not including shipping in the value for duty. For example, if you buy something for, say, $5,000 US dollars, and they say, don't worry, include shipping, you should ask them saying, hey, can you back out the shipping because I don't want to pay duty on that portion of the cost. And for exports, it can help prevent international customs from assuming that the value does not include shipping, because they have and they will arbitrarily add in a value that if you don't put CIF value, they'll say, oh, well, doesn't include shipping. We're going to add this to the value for duty. So note that while US Customs excludes transport costs for the value for duty, it considers other items that may not necessarily be on the invoice. For example, payment of a royalty fee should be considered as part of the transaction value. For example, another example is if they say, we'll do some special packing for you, and they send you a separate invoice for the packing. If it's for the goods being imported, that should be included as part of the transaction value, even if it's not on the invoice. So just keep in mind and look at these lists when you submit to customs the value. In some cases, there is no direct transaction, such as importing samples or receiving warranty parts. And remember, there's no such thing as a zero value when it comes to customs. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, there is no value, they're just sending me samples. In such cases, the cost of identical goods or similar goods are the following methods used in determining the value. Each method of valuation follows in hierarchical order. So you take the transaction value, well, it's not really a transaction. Okay, well, what's the cost of identical goods or value of identical goods? Then you go to the value of similar goods. If none of those are possible, then you go into the more, I would say, more computative methods, deductive methods, computed, and fallback methods. But just keep in mind that these exist. Another complicating part is goods for intercompany transfers or transfers between related entities. This can be an issue. Say you're a subsidiary of a larger group, international group, and they send you supplies and they send you an invoice for that, and you have to pay duty on it. Be careful, because customs, that complicates things, and not just for customs and imports, but also for tax reasons. So if it's an intercompany transfer between related entities, the transaction value is not acceptable, and you need to work with customs and work with the tax and import specialists to figure out what would the value for customs be. And again, looping back to exports, the same discussions of value occur globally, same principles, but differences. As I mentioned, the shipping costs. Some include shipping costs, some shipping costs and insurance. So just keep that in mind. The value can be tricky, it can be very clear and simple, and it can be very tricky, like pretty much all these subjects. Let's talk about country of origin. Many assume that purchasing and shipping goods define the origin of goods. However, from where goods ship is different than their country of origin. The country of origin generally refers to the country of manufacture, or from where the goods were, the term is wholly obtained. That's the term that you often hear in customs parlance. For example, if you order, say, avocados from Mexico and they're shipped from Mexico, the country of origin would be Mexico. If, however, you order something from Mexico and they were made in China, the country of origin would be China, not Mexico. But no matter from where the goods ship, whether from Canada or Croatia, they are subject to the same import processes. Having said that, from where goods ship can influence such things as import quotas, special programs, and areas of policy enforcement. For example, now there's a huge enforcement effort on e-commerce goods from China. If you're importing e-commerce goods from China, just by nature of those goods, they are at this point subject to a higher level of scrutiny and oversight and possible inspection. For countries sharing a free trade agreement with the US, which we'll discuss later, the country of origin can offer duty-free import. Also, some goods from the Caribbean and African countries can benefit from special duty rates. Speaking of duty, let's get on to the duty rate. In most cases, import duties are determined by the three main factors we just discussed: tariff classification, or HS code, country of origin, and value. In most cases, tariff classification and country of origin determine the percentage to apply to the value for duty. Keep in mind that duty is just one of many potential import fees. Duty-free does not mean free of other import fees. You have merchandise processing fee, if it's a formal entry preparation, brokerage fee, customs bond, not to mention local handling, local pickup, and things like that. So, and I've heard often, hey man, it's duty free. Why'd I get these fees? Well, you didn't get charged duty, you got charged these other fees. Duty rates most often fall into what is called column 1 duty rates, consignments from countries with normalized trade relations with the US. It's basically every country except North Korea and Cuba, and I forget the other one or two countries. So most of them fall under here. In this case, it's 4.4%. It's called ad valorem value, which means percentage of the value. And also note that while the duty rate can also be per unit of weight, volume, or units. In this case, it's 1.3 kilograms, 1.3 cents per kilogram if you're importing dry vegetables, plus 1.8% of the value. And another example is wine. The duty rate for wine is per liter. So it's often, most often in my experience, by percentage of the value, but it can be by unit of measure. USA free trade agreements. The USMCA, or NAFTA, or the new NAFTA, is by far America's most impactful free trade agreement. With massive trade volumes between Mexico, the US, and Canada. I mean, just massive, and especially being in New York State, sharing a huge a border with Canada, the trade between the two countries, I think Canada is one of the biggest export markets for New York. But keep in mind, those at US and Canada, that US has free trade agreements with 18 other countries. All these agreements facilitates trade in both goods and services, and they generally follow the same format. For merchandise or goods, the key advantage is duty-free import for originating goods. The agreements have general rules of origin that outline how goods can qualify as originating, and thus duty-free import. There's also specific rules for certain categories, notably automotive and textiles. So while it can seem incredibly complex because, well, it can be, free trade benefits are there for the taking. If you're purchasing from a country that has a free trade agreement with the US, notably Mexico and Canada, but also Australia, Korea, Chile, and others, ask your supplier if they can provide a certification of origin. Looping again back to exports, if you're importing foreign parts for goods that will be manufactured in New York or in the US, they may still qualify as US origin. Most free trade agreements allow for some level of foreign components to be, and for example, you can import some parts and build them in the US, even if you have some foreign components. There's rules on, it's called de minimis level for that. There's de minimis levels for foreign parts. They can still qualify as US origin if you want to export those goods to a free trade country. Trade.gov has great online resources, and you should visit them. It's well written and well explained. So I invite you to visit those websites. Okay, let's talk about consumption entry types. And then really just entry types. Again, the basics here are really quite simple. The entry types is determined primarily by the value of the importing consignment. Most shipments valued under $800 qualify for duty-free import via what is known as Section 321. There are several ways to access Section 321, with New York having several express consignment ports of entry. There are also freight options. Linda is a founding member of the express facility at JFK called NIAC. And then we have informal entries, which are shipments valued under $2,500. The advantage of these is you don't need a customs bond and they don't need to keep records for 5 years for an informal entry. But I want to add a note on this. I think one of the understated advantages of an express consignment facility is $800 is great for consumer goods, and it's an amazing number, by the way. Exporting to the rest of the world, no one has near the $800, that de minimis level. It's called the duty-free threshold. So that is a huge advantage on importing to the US. And the Section 321 processes are generally much less intensive as far as regulatory oversight. So it's a great tool. But if it's above 800, especially industrial products or commercial transactions, 800 is not that much. But you can go up to $2,500 and import via an express consignment facility, and they can arrange for a consolidated informal entry. They can link all those entries together, and it's kind of getting in the weeds a little bit of entry processing, but I just wanted to mention that express consignment is great in ECCF, is great for Section 321, but it's also great for informal entries. And finally, we go to formal entries, which is above $2,500, or if the goods are otherwise restricted. It doesn't matter the value of it. If certain goods, it doesn't matter what, they still need a formal entry. Postal entries, and this is interesting. well, I don't know if it's interesting, but it's a point that should be brought out. If you import goods via the post office, or if you receive goods via the post office, if it's under $2,500, it will clear. And it's weird to me to still say this, but postal imports are worthy of mention because it seems much easier to clear, especially when other government agencies are involved. Technically, postal imports are subject to the same regulations. In practice, at least anecdotally, I often hear, well, that was not required when I shipped it with the post. Oh, I never had to do that before. So that's a common issue. So via the post, I would say just be aware of that. If you're importing things, say you're receiving goods, and you think, well, this would be great. I want to import a bunch of these things. Whatever these things are, keep in mind that I would consult with a broker or do some research, because that thing or things that you're importing with no problem via the post may require a much higher degree of certifications or paperwork, or as Linda mentioned, maybe the manufacturer's address and postal code and things like that. So if you're receiving goods via the post office without the requisite requirements, good for you. But just keep in mind, if you want to import commercially and scale it up, you may have other different requirements, even though technically it's all subject to the same regulations. Before concluding on customs entries, I want to clarify the term bond. For purposes of formal entries, customs entries require a surety bond to guarantee payment of duty and other fees to the government. The bond can be for a single shipment, known as a single entry bond. And that's the example, as I said, if you're receiving something from overseas, the freight forwarder's broker calls you and says, hey, I have these goods, I can clear it for you. Yeah, yes, please clear it for you. They give you a power of attorney. The broker will, excuse me, will charge you what's called a surety bond, a single entry bond. If you import regularly, you should look into getting a continuous entry bond. It secures transactions over a 12-month period. And there's a method and a way how they value it. It's based on the value of imports you have coming in. They base it on a percentage and you pay that. But it's usually much more cost-effective to have a continuous entry bond if you're importing regularly, as opposed to transit bonds. And there's bail bonds. And I think bond is something, it's a common term. That's why I wanted to clarify it. But it's also transport bond is when, if you have goods coming in, say they're coming into California, you want to clear them in New York, a California port, and you ship them in, they would transit in bond on a transportation bond. So that's just a small point I wanted to clarify, because I think the term bond is thrown around quite a bit, and I just wanted to clarify it. Partner government agencies. Often, customs clearance is the easy part, as an entry awaits approval for a partner agency, from a partner agency. Among the most common partner agency is the Food and Drug Administration. Each of these agencies have unique requirements regarding prior notice, certifications, and licensing, and even admissibility. A final key takeaway from this is time is of the essence, not just for customs, but also for other partner agencies. Once your goods arrive at a U.S. port, you have 15 days to make entry. And storage charges can accrue really quickly, within 12 hours. Linda reminded me of 12 hours and up to 24 hours. And they're exorbitantly high, because these warehouses, they have a captive audience. You have these goods coming in, and it takes an extra day or two to clear, and they're like, oh, we're going to charge you X amount. And you're like, are you kidding me? But you have no choice. You're just held kind of captive. The only way to avoid those fees is to make sure you get everything lined up, everything ready, and you make pre-entry. You can try to pre-clear it before it arrives, but just make sure everything's in order so you don't get these fees. The other thing is, entry must be made within 15 days of arrival. And I've seen this happen, particularly with partner government agencies, where they say, oh, you need the certification before you can make entry. Then you have to jump through hoops to try to get it. And those 15 days, believe me, can travel really quick, can become up really quick. And you have to either re-export it within those 15 days, or it goes to a warehouse for another extraordinarily high cost and a pain in the neck to get it out. Another thing, actually, Linda brought up this point to me. Some ports use a CES, or Central Exam Station, for examinations, which again, is a cost. And one way to avoid examinations is just have everything in order. I mean, if you're called for a random exam, there's nothing you can do. If you're importing from an area that's targeted for high level inspection, this is kind of luck of the draw. But I believe that, and Linda and I can vouch for this, if you have everything in order and everything straightforward, it's much less likely that your goods would be subject to an exam. Modes of shipping and carrier options. There are several intrinsic advantages of being in New York. These include a major seaport, abundance of air cargo capacity, both outbound and inbound, especially if you count Newark, and easily access land border to the north to Canada, and an industry cluster of shipping and brokerage expertise. Often the best cost for shipping is via what we in the industry call in-country pricing. In other words, the best shipping costs from Germany, for example, are probably obtained in Germany from Germany. But often suppliers, the supplier's profit margin to shipping may make it less competitive. The advantage I find of getting rates from New York or locally can be more transparency regarding import fees. Sometimes you'll get a cost from overseas and they'll say, oh, that's the rate. You think it's a great rate, good to go. And then it arrives, you think, well, I wasn't anticipating this, I'm anticipating that. Oh, it doesn't include that. So you get more transparency if you work with a trusted shipper. But no matter what shipping method you use or forwarder, you get the opportunity to choose which broker you want to clear your goods. All in all, New York is a great place to be when it comes to both importing and exporting. It's a marketplace to the world. And thus concludes this presentation. I hope it's provided you with the framework you need to continue your research and access to new suppliers and opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Tim. And let's invite Mercedes and Linda back on screen so we can do some Q&A. So I know Mercedes was just introducing or just addressing this question through text. So the first one was about if there isn't a postal code for a particular country. And so you can see Mercedes's response in the Q&A box, Tim and Linda, if there's anything that you would like to add, feel free to do so.
Okay, what's in the open or answered?
Answered. Mm-hmm.
Answer portion.
Okay. Gotcha. What if there isn't a postal code from a particular country? I mean, if they don't have postal codes? Well,
Yes.
the answer is two things. If they don't have a postal code, then it's not required, obviously. Some countries don't have postal codes. The two countries where I find it's an issue, one is from China, as I mentioned in the presentation. The second one is Colombia. Colombia has postal codes, but often, I don't know, shipping to Colombia and often receiving from Colombia. There's some countries that there is a postal code system, but most people are not as familiar with it. So, but if the country does not have postal codes, it wouldn't be a required field.
Thank you. So this is a great question. How do you know who is a trusted shipper when you aren't familiar with all of the possible vendors?
Linda?
Let's see. Linda, I think maybe having some issues with her sound here again.
Well, and
Linda?
on trusted shippers, it's pretty much you can go with the name brands, and you basically will know shippers for how long they've been in business for. I think that's a good gauge, because there's a lot of shipping capacity out there and a lot of trusted shippers, and it's kind of Linda, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I've been having problems. I couldn't get unmuted, but I'm back. I
Okay, great.
apologize.
The question was how to find a trusted shipper.
I just wanted to go back 1 minute, if you don't mind, to the postal code for China. That is very important because US Customs is now enforcing forced labor. So if you don't have your zip code, they will not clear the entry at all for China. And there is a list in Customs website of all of the companies that currently are not allowed importations due to forced labor, but that doesn't mean they are the only ones that are not allowed for forced labor. So just keep that in mind. Again, the internet is a great resource because you can find a lot of this information there. Now, Tim, you were talking about known shippers. Known shippers is really with regards to export, not import. And that's, again, there is a list. And if your shipper is not on that known shipper list that is provided, then you have to either get your shipper on that list or put it on an aircraft for unknown shippers.
Cargo.
If I can also, with regards to the presentation, for the participants, harmonized codes can be found online. Customs provides you with a full tariff schedule. And also, Customs has something called CSMS. And it's messaging, it's a messaging center that you can sign up for that will give you information on changing harmonized codes or codes that are not going to be used any longer, or if there's something specific happening with that code. And with regard to imports, when we talked about duties, please know there are additional tariffs for goods from China. Some of those goods have an additional tariff in addition to what's in the harmonized book of 25%, and some are 7%. And again, that's called Section 301 and Section 203. Very complicated, can be found online. That is why I also recommend, as Tim stated in the onset, that depending upon the country you're coming from, you may want to reach out to a customs attorney because you need to find out in advance so you could properly price your merchandise. Do these goods have additional tariffs? Are these goods subject to a lot of these other rulings? And so you know in advance what you're going to be up against and not once it arrives. There are two other items and that you can come up against. One is called anti-dumping and the other is countervailing duties. These are two items that Customs is getting more and increasingly involved in. And what does that mean? That means if a foreign country supplements the exporter or supplier with funds that makes it less costly than something the importer can buy here, and it's government funded there, the US government will impose additional anti-dumping for governments or countervailing duty. This is a very big subject and something that you need much more time than we have here to go into. And this all brings me to something called, Tim referred to it as an advance ruling. I would refer to it as a binding ruling. And Customs, if you look up in online, Customs offers free binding rulings if you do it yourself online. This will give you the harmonized code for the item you're importing, and it will tell you if it's subject to any China additional tariffs, and it will also tell you whether it's subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duty. This is a great tool. Customs will answer you normally. They say within 30 days. My feeling is you have to give it a little more time. Plus, if you didn't give them enough information in the original application, you will have to, they may send it back to you and you'll have to give them the additional information and then send it back again. I know I'm covering a lot of things. I didn't want to interrupt while we were speaking. There's also something called Incoterms. Tim talked about CIF, but there's a lot of different ways that goods can be shipped. It can be shipped FOB, which is free on board, which is just the cost of the goods. CIF, freight and insurance are not dutiable items. There's also a way to ship with the duty prepaid, with the duty paid at origin. So I would recommend to the participants to go ahead and take a look at what Incoterms are and the manner in which you would prefer to ship. The easiest is always FOB. CIF is fine, but then as Tim said, you have to make sure they break out on your invoice the cost of the insurance and the cost of the freight charges, be it air or ocean, because you do not want to pay duty on those items. Merchandise processing fee is payable on all entries except for the $800 de minimis one. Harbor maintenance fee is another duty that is applicable to only to all ocean consignments. The $800 de minimis that Tim spoke about is really a great thing that U.S. Customs has implemented for the importer. This allows you to bring in $800 worth of goods per day, per individual, per importer of record. So you could bring in $800 a day, every day, one time, into the US free of duty. I will tell you that with regard to de minimis shipments, you have to still comply with all other governmental agencies. So if you do have Food and Drug, Fish and Wildlife, USDA, it really throws out the de minimis, and formal entries are required at these container freight stations or an ECCF, which is an express consignment container facility. Additionally, when you're shipping to utilize the services of a CFS or an ECCF, you must contact them in advance, because there's information, quite a lot of information that has to be submitted to U.S. Customs in advance of arrival of the freight. And that's very important because Customs has a zero tolerance policy, and you would be subject to a $10,000 fine for everyone that comes in without that template being submitted to U.S. Customs in advance. Canada and Mexico is a 1-hour rule. All the other countries are 4-hour rules. That means that a minimum of 4 hours, that information has to be submitted to Customs.
Prior to
Tim?
prior to the scheduled departure.
Yes. You could do it, like, let's say your flight is 2 days or 3 days before it gets to destination. But you don't leave any room for errors or problems. And there are many, many pitfalls if you're not careful and speak to the right person about what you can and cannot do. There is also, you need the shipper's information, the consignee's information, the value, the weight, the house airway bill. Everything has to be done correctly. And again, as Tim said, the only way you might get away with all of this is if you ship it via mail. There's also companies like FedEx, UPS, DHL who does this also. And you may want to check around before you decide who you want to use and how you want to ship. I hope are there other questions you have for me, Tim?
So we do have some questions. Someone asked, so you just mentioned a 4-hour rule and penalty. What was that called?
That 4-hour rule is part of the de minimis importing fee. And the 4-hour rule is part of what went into effect in December of 2003. It's called AMS, Air Manifest System. And it's part of that that's the 4-hour rule. And it can be you can look that up online also.
And
Okay.
this is only for air shipments?
Air.
It's
Oh.
air, but they do have ocean now. Ocean is called
10+2.
24 hours, isn't it, for ocean?
4 hours, 4 hours for air. Ocean is called ISF, Importer Security Filing, and that must be done before the goods are laden aboard the vessel.
Yeah, 24
And-
hours before that.
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
So we've had some people who are brand new to importing on the webinar today. And so I'd like to just have you both speak a little bit about this. I know Mercedes has been fantastic answering questions through the Q&A box, and thank you for that, Mercedes.
Thank you.
So if I have a freight forwarder, should I still consider an import broker as well?
Well, a freight forwarder is not necessarily a customs broker, but in a lot of cases, they do offer those services either through their own company or with a relationship they have with a custom house broker. A freight forwarder does not have to be a licensed custom house broker.
Yeah, what I've been telling them is if they don't have much knowledge about import procedures and they're going to start importing, I think it's advisable that they contact a custom broker and then get advice, than just try to do something on their own, depending on what it is. But
yeah, I think it gets back to, in my view, how involved you want to get. If you want to just kind of one-shop solution, and if you're using a freight forwarder and it's their broker and you're happy with them, I wouldn't see a reason why you wouldn't use their broker. The only thing is, I find on the flip side of that is to have an independent broker. On the other hand, you sort of have it's like a check and balance sort of thing, and you have this thing: what's coming in, what's going on, and then it can be more costly to have your own broker because you have to transfer the paperwork to your broker. But I think the advantage is if you plan to grow and scale in any level, it's just good to have one broker who can manage all your imports. You get familiar with what you're doing, how you're doing, the difference in all these specific things we're talking about. They can be incredibly unique to each importer. And once you know it, like like Linda was talking about, say it's coming from this person or this company in China to, oh, that guy again. Okay, there we go. We'll do it. And yeah, we're familiar with that. And remember, we had this issue before. Let's try it this way, or things like that. So both are good solutions. So the answer, I think, is if you're doing one-offs and not a frequent importer, I would say it's not a bad idea to stick with. And if you're happy with the freight forwarder and their broker, I would say it's probably best to use them. But I always think it's better to have an independent broker, but with a caveat, it can be more expensive, but I think marginally so based on the value of what you're probably importing.
mm-hmm.
And just as a reminder, I wanted to put the link for signing up for our no-cost, high-quality business advising services. So our local centers work with Dr. Sanchez-Moore to give you all of these details that you may be looking for, help you get things in order. Another question that we had was about getting together all of those documents that like a first-time importer needs. And do you have any suggestions on doing that, any of the three of you?
Well, I would say the first thing is I put in the presentation, commercial invoice, commercial invoice, commercial invoice. Make sure you have all the necessary information. I think sometimes people overthink the shipping documents. It's that and the bill of lading are the two most fundamental aspects. The bill of lading comes from the carrier. The commercial invoice comes from you. Now, when it comes to partner government agencies, that's a whole other ball of wax, which that's a whole other webinar on what may be required. But my just top of the napkin, notes on the napkin, notes answer to that is commercial invoice and bill of lading issued by the carrier. But it all kind of draws from the commercial invoice and making sure you have the information I put in the presentation. The fundamentals were there. And Linda mentioned the shipping terms. I purposely exclude that because I didn't know how much time we had, but all the information, it stems from there. Would you agree with that, Linda?
Yes, additionally, there's one item you should know about. And that's that any custom house broker will need you to sign a customs power of attorney. This is something that has to be done. I would highly recommend you do all of this work in advance so that everything is ready for when those goods come into the country. U.S. Customs, in addition to customs power of attorney, you also have to fill out what's called a Customs Form 5106, which gives U.S. Customs information on how to, where they can reach you and all of that type of information. The form looks very complicated, but it comes with instructions and it really isn't complicated.
Thank you for that. And I know we had a last question just come in on getting the updated HS codes, and I know Mercedes was putting some information there in the chat. So if you do have questions, please feel free to, you can get in touch with Dr. Mercedes Sanchez-Moore through her email, which is in the chat. It's mercedes.sanchezmoore@nysbdc.org. And she's happy to answer some questions and get you started on this, this road to advisement for importing.
Yes, and I also wanted to add, I see some questions regarding FDA approval, regarding the importation of alcoholic beverages. Those are very specific and large questions to answer in this webinar. This is just an introduction. So if you were so kind, send me an email and I will facilitate web links and information of individuals that can further provide you more answers to that.
Fantastic. And we did just have a question come in about custom brokers for a specific area. So yes, please get in touch with Dr. Sanchez-Moore, and that is something with which she can help you. So yes, go ahead.
There is a list of custom brokers at the Customs and Border Protection website.
Okay, quick answer. There we go.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are at time for today. Thank you so much. This has been a wealth of importing information, and yeah, I have learned a ton, and I know that our new importers and even some importers with some specific questions have gotten a lot of very, very valuable information from the three of you today. So thank you so much, Tim, for your presentation, Linda, for your additions, and Dr. Sanchez-Moore, thank you as always. You have been fantastic in answering those questions through the Q&A box, and we really appreciate it. There are many thank yous coming in the chat and question and answer box. So thank you from our audience, passing those along to you. We'll shut down the webinar in just a moment. We do have a survey. If you have a few moments to give us some feedback, we always love hearing from attendees, knowing what we can do to better support you in your business endeavors in New York State. And with that, we will shut things down for today and wish you all a lovely rest of your day.